Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the setting of expectations. Often the difference between having a pleasant life experience that's fun and having an unpleasant life experience is how the expectations you had going into the experience stack up with what reality actually presents to you when the experience unfolds. So if we set the correct expectations, events that offer some opportunities for unpleasantness can actually be still put into a nice happy space. Before I get onto that, I just want to take advantage of a little opportunity for some public failure. I haven't been posting all that many videos because my little tutoring business is kicking into high gear at the moment. School's just started. Everybody wants help with mathematics. So I'd like to redouble my little efforts on this channel. And I'm going to try to do a video every day for the next week and just see how it happens. Probably going to fail, but that's fine. I'm going to learn some stuff. And that's the attitude of mind we got to bring to the whole endeavor. So, that said, we'll see how that turns out. Back to expectations. My favorite approach to managing expectations is a little something I like to call attentive pessimism. So, attentive meaning you got to pay very close attention. This requires a fair bit of active upkeep to make this all work, but when it works, it's great. And the pessimism is just the recognition that we have very few sort of levers to pull in the unfolding of the events of our lives. The world is unfortunately very big, and we as human beings are very small, so we don't get to exercise a tremendous amount of control. What levers we have, we can try to use to make things turn out the way that we'd like them to turn out. But there are a whole lot of degrees of freedom that we don't have any control over. And so when we're setting up expectations, it's really about how are those elements of the upcoming experience that we have no control over going to shake out? Is it going to come up that all of these things happen to line up to be super awesome, super great? Or are they going to happen to line up to be super unfortunate? Or is it going to be more likely something in between? So bringing the attentiveness to understand what are the things that are actually within my power in this upcoming experience and what are the things that are completely out of my hands. And then in those things that are completely out of our hands, making sort of the assessment of, okay, what's the worst that could happen? And just making preparations for that. Then letting the experience unfold and really attending to what actually happens. And this is, a lot of people do pessimism. A lot of people don't do pessimism with postmortems. They don't do the follow-up. They don't really go, okay, I expected the worst, and what did I get? Because most of the time, you're not going to get the worst. And then you get to be pleasantly surprised if you're paying attention. So the key here is make that pessimistic set of expectations and then live your entire life in being pleasantly surprised by how much better than you thought things were going to go. Things always go. That's the key. The follow-up is what twists that sort of pessimism out of cynicism and into a really positive experience, because I was ready for the worst thing that happened, which means I never had the experience of being underprepared for events as they unfold, and I constantly have the experience of being pleasantly surprised that, hey, I was prepared for the worst, but it didn't happen. Actually, things turned out better. Awesome. And when your expectations are exceeded, human being is set up for that to be a pleasant life experience. And when your expectations are not even met, let alone exceeded, that's going to be unpleasant. There's just no way around that. It's an interesting thing about the way that we're put together is that how we frame our expectations going into experience sort of engages us in these hardwired processes then to respond to that experience. So if the expectations are high, then we're going to have a bad time. If the expectations are low and we're paying attention to the fact that everything went better than expected, we're going to have a good time. And it's really that easy. You do a little work up front. I say that. It's really that easy. It's really that easy when you're really good at it. As you're building up these skills, it can be a little bit tricky. And it should be noted that this is a first pass approach to setting expectations. This is, when you're just getting started at actually actively managing your own life experience continuously, moment by moment. This is relatively easy to execute. It's not going to get you always the best outcomes in life. It's just going to minimize disappointment and maximize the experience of everything went better than expected. When you get more skillful, when you're more practiced in paying attention in a detailed way, when you're more practiced in actually fine-tuning your experience, when you've got that whole cognitive skill set built up, then you can actually go for different strategies with managing your expectations. You can actually sit down and think about what are the likely outcomes, and what are my plays that sort of maximize the likelihood of some sort of positive outcome. That sort of thing, though, for most people, I think is actually kind of pretty far down the road to sort of optimize one's experience in that way. To set your expectations around the most likely outcomes requires you to have a tremendous amount of self-knowledge about what power you actually have to act in the world, what skills you have, and really, what are the levers that you're able to use to act in the world. My experience is most of us don't have a very good read on that, and we tend to have a sort of built-in evaluation. Some people are just very optimistic by nature, and you got to scale back the expectations, right? Some people are very pessimistic by nature, and it's going to be more of a work to actually pay attention to the things that did go right. And until you have a really good inventory of your biases and how your estimations of the likelihood of various sort of degrees of freedom of the world lining up in a way that benefits you, how that gets biased in your experience, you're not going to be able to execute that sort of strategy. So you just take a very simple strategy of, okay, let's just prepare for the worst and also make sure to take the time to be pleasantly surprised when everything goes better than expected all the time, because we expected it to go as bad as it could possibly go, and that's very unlikely. There's an interesting sort of little side note there, which is that, most of us sort of frame our experiences as if we're the hero of this story, right? So we have this sort of narrative arc superimposed over our life. And so it can get really compelling, the notion that everything's out to get you, because we tell so many stories where, you have this massive antagonism working against a protagonist, but that's not really the way the universe works. A comforting thought, I find, I know a lot of people don't agree with me on this, the universe doesn't care about me in the slightest. So when all of the degrees of freedom in the universe that are outside of my control are getting settled out, likelihood is that I'm going to get as much good as I get bad, because there's nothing out there that's really out to get me. It's just stuff's happening. And stuff happening, that's totally manageable. I can set expectations around that. And I can engineer a situation where I can't lose, right? Okay, I'm ready for whatever the worst that can happen is. It's never going to happen. And every single time I'll be pleasantly surprised that it turned out better than expected. And that's a life I could lead.